Hey guys, welcome back to Impossible Color, where every week I reveal my secrets of digital art. Today I'm going to be going through the camera raw processing of the FairyCreek portrait. I took a lot of different photos in this session, and you can see that I've got them labeled with this little blue marker. I like to do that when I take hundreds of photos and I can kind of filter it down to my favorites. So this is the photo that I'd like to work with today. So let's open that up in Camera Raw. And I always shoot my pictures in with the camera neutral profile. So I want to match up the same when I edit them. I don't want the software or my camera to be trying to decide how it wants my image to look. I want to figure that out on my own. So camera neutral. And one of the first things you want to have a look at is your white balance. Generally, I like to try the auto and just see if it gets it any better, but I think I like the what my camera was shot at anyway. It looks pretty good to me. If you ever want to check, this is also a great tool, the white balance tool up here. And if you can find something that is a kind of a neutral gray or a white or a black that isn't too white or too dark, so you can kind of pick around and see some changes here. Pretty much the same thing, so I'm going to run with that. The next thing that I'd like to look at is the exposure. Overall, the exposure of the image, we have some highlights and we have some dark areas popping out here, but as a whole it's pretty good exposure, so I don't want to make any drastic changes in here, so I'm going to skip that one. Now I do see some definite issues with some highlights here. We're losing some definition in the dress and also in the sky, which isn't quite so bad, but definitely want to work on that dress. So I'm going to tone down the highlights here. It's going to look a little funny at first, but we're going to get some of that back in the whites. It's looking a little bit shaded now. And the shadows, we're losing a lot of detail in these darker areas of the rock. So we're going to bring a lot of that back. Now what's happening is we are flattening out our image a bit, but that's okay, because we're going to do the extremes. That's what the whites and blacks are, the extremes on the tonal range. So I'm going to bring some whites up. As you can see, we're getting some blown out kind of a bloom effect up here, which isn't necessarily that bad, but I'm going to bring down my highlights so I get this area clear again. Now as you're going through these changes, it's also a good idea to put on your clipping tools here, and that's your clipping of your white and your shadow clipping there. You can kind of see that one's represented by blue and your white clipping is represented by red. So generally, if it's an important area, I don't want to see any of the red in there. So I'm going to bring my whites way down here until all that red goes away. Now for the blacks, I'm going to turn that down a bit. I don't mind losing a bit there if there's a gain elsewhere. But you definitely don't want a very large portion of your image to be totally blacked out. Definitely don't want to see it clipping out in the hair. I'm liking how that's looking down there. And you can always turn them on and off to get a sense of how it's going to look. I know it's distracting to see that the blue showing up in there. We're going to be doing some individual tonal adjustments in Photoshop in the second part of this video. So I'm just kind of getting like an overall average look of tone that I'd like to have. The next slider down here that I work with is clarity. You can see if you go to one extreme, you're going to get that sort of really cloudy Vaseline over the lens look. If you go to the other extreme, you get this kind of a grungy, extreme high pass filter sort of look. Often for men, I'll go a little bit more on the high clarity side, and for women I want a bit of a softer look, I'll go down there. But for this image, I think we're just going to leave it right in the middle. Okay, now for our color adjustments. Before I get into this, I'm gonna just, to make this a little easier, I could adjust the saturation one by one, but I'm actually gonna just go to this slider in this other menu to bring the whole thing down, just to give a slightly more cinematic feel. I think I'll go minus 15% there. Now you can make additional adjustments on top of that. I'm going to do the saturation first so that I can actually see what's going on in some of the hues, because it's a little bit more desaturated. Some things won't quite show up. So generally I just go through one by one and kind of see the effects as I'm going. I really like the red that's coming out in the lips there. So I'm going to turn this up quite a bit. Generally I go to the extreme just to see what it's like, and then I start to scale back a bit. Now, oranges tend to look pretty unusual for portraits when you start to crank that up, and I generally don't want to, really never adjust that in the positive direction at all. And if you go in the other direction, you start getting this really corpse-like look, which may work for some kind of a cold zombie look or something. Frozen in time. But not today. So try those yellows. Tone those down just a little bit more than the rest, because I don't want that background overshadowing the image. And we'll do the same thing for the greens. Now, one thing you'll notice is a lot of these, the green, the yellow, and the aqua tend to be, in a scene like this with the forest, they tend to take place in the same area. So if you're adjusting one or two of those, you really have to pay attention to the other areas as well. And onto the blues. Not a lot of blue in this photo, but you can see it up here around the tree line. I like to round these off, because if I ever bump them, I'll kind of have a better memory of what they are. Now for the purples, often it's hard to tell what's going on with that, so you want to zoom in. And generally you're going to get some purple reflections in the hair coming from the sky. It's very subtle changes, but because it's only in one area, I definitely want to reduce it so it doesn't kind of look like she's got a specific purple highlight in there. You can kind of see it changing in some of these areas in the hair. If you go down too low, you're going to gray it out and it's going to look kind of funky. But if I exaggerate it, you can really see where it shows up all along here. So this is what we have so far. Now we're going to do some overall hue adjustments. So your hue is the actual color in your image, as opposed to saturation being the purity of that color, and the luminance being the tonal value of, or the brightness value of how bright or dark it is. Color is a matter of personal preference, of course, but for myself, my reds, I always tend to bring them a little bit more on the cool side, so they become more pinky reds, and kind of see in the lips there some changes. I really like that look. And just go through these one by one. Just like the saturation of the skin, I generally don't mess around with the hue of the skin, which is generally in the orange channel here. The skin is also represented by a lot of yellow. And onto the green. Again, I always like to do the extremes just to kind of get a full idea of how it might look. Try on the warm side here as well. And I like it slightly more on the cooler green side. Same thing for our aqua. Start with the extremes. And slightly cooler on that one for me as well. The blues, I'm going to leave those where they're at. Now the purple is quite desaturated, as you can see from here, so when we adjust the hue, you're not really going to notice it too much. That tends to blend it in the surrounding areas of the hair a little bit better. And the magenta, I'm just going to leave that one. Now the final tab in the HSL palette here is the luminance. And I'll zoom back in so you can actually see what's happening with the red here on the lips. You can also see a little bit on the shoulder and hands here. I find more often than not, if somebody has some skin imperfections, you want to lighten the luminance for red, and often for orange as well, and it generally helps to kind of get rid of those little blemishes, or at least prepares it for the next step. I'm going to bring that orange up, which we've been avoiding the orange in the hue and saturation, but in terms of the luminance, I find that regardless of whatever the skin tone is, adding a little bit of brightness to it helps it pop a bit from the background. Now if we went to the extreme, we're going to get these kind of weird outliney look in a few areas, which isn't good. It's often a good idea to zoom in and out as you're going, just to make sure nothing funky is happening. I'm going to turn on my my clipping warnings again, just to make sure I'm not going to any extremes. And the yellows. Just going to turn off those warnings again. Don't quite need those right now. The yellow looks good. Green I'm going to bring down a little bit. The aqua drop back into the background a little bit more. Just going to add a little bit to the blue to kind of blend it into the highlights here a little bit more. A little bit of purple will kind of pop that highlight slightly on her hair. Magentas will leave. Often it's a good idea to view your image small, really small, to kind of get a big picture to make sure you're not losing anything. Lose the forest through the trees. The next palette that we're going to look at is split toning. Now basically what this does is it takes a color and you can change the hue of the highlights. You can pick another color and change the hue of the shadows. Now when I'm picking colors to play around with split toning, I always like to do it at the extreme first, so that you have a good idea if your colors are complementary or not. So the first color, I usually try to represent a nice warm glow of the sun here. And just go until it finds a pleasant complementary color right about there. Then I bring it way back down to normal. Now I'm not sure if the split tone is going to look better or worse for this photo, but generally I like to play around with some different ideas. And then I'll show you how to save some snapshots so we can kind of bounce back and forth and see what we think of the two together. Let's try that one. So go to the snapshots tab here, and basically this just takes a picture, kind of records your settings in case you want to bounce around, change settings, and then jump back to what you had before. So we'll call this the split tone warming, and just turn this off again and save another one, and this will be the original. So we've got our split tone and back to our original. And I can see in the split tone that I'm not liking the shadows. They're looking a little bit too cold for me. So I'm just going to turn that down a bit. Save a second one. And I like that better, so I'll delete that one. Original and the split tone. So I'm going to run with that split tone there. Looks the way I like it. And the next tab we want to look at is the lens corrections. It's always a good idea to check this one out, just in case. You might miss some things that your lens is somehow distorting your image in some way. So we'll turn the automatic on and see. You'll get a little bit more length of the body here. You can kind of see that there was some slight distortion. And you can see in the corners that we had a little bit of vignetting happening. So I'm going to keep that on. And that wraps up the camera raw portion of this video. Now we're just going to go and look at the original camera raw defaults. So this is what we started with, and this is what we ended up with. So please see the next video to see what we can do in Photoshop. Thanks for watching. Be sure to subscribe, and if you have any ideas for new videos that you'd like to see, please say so in the comments below.